Technical and security deep dive. I am Torren Manson, solutions architect with Cloud Revolution. You can hit me up on social there. I will probably respond to you within a couple of days. Huge shout out to our sponsors. Really, without them, we wouldn't be able to put this on. So it is very much more than just going to their booth and giving you some information. It's about the funding for all of this. So really grateful to all of them. So we've already talked about the sponsors. So we'll do an introduction to shared channels and channels in general, just to be able to have some background and have a better conversation about shared channels. Talk about some typical use cases, and then we'll dive under the hood and see what do they look like under there, what's different, why do some things not work, why do some things not happen that we might expect to happen. So I've been doing UC in the Microsoft space way back since it was Live Communication Server 2003 and didn't do very much at all. I like to also say that I'm a reformed networking and security consultant. I don't do a lot of networking and security anymore, but I do still have a lot of bleed over into it. One of the cool things about UC is it touches everything else that's out there. I can't do a UC deployment without talking to the networking guys, to the security guys, at least once. So in my screenshots, I've got a couple of different tenants here. If you are a Battlestar Galactica fan, you may recognize the call signs Racetrack and Flat Top. I was waiting for that, thank you. It's been 2 years. So they are the home tenant that is basically doing all of the sharing. I have Carl at mynewlabdomain.com. I'm lacking creativity at that moment, who will bring in as a shared channel user. And then Artemis is our guest account. Artemis is a cat. So good for a guest. Guests do what they want. Cats do what they want. There's some correlation there. So how did we get here with shared channels? In standard channels, we have two users in the same organization. They're having a conversation. The channels that they've got in the team are the same. So this is cool, as long as everyone in that team gets access to the same stuff, just like they would to a file share, we're good to go. Where this falls apart, though, is when we want to bring other people into that conversation and perhaps have them have different access to different things. So we have the concept of a guest. I can now invite someone from outside of my organization into that team, and team, not channel. The scope of that is at the team level to participate in things. Great that I can bring external people in. This is far better than emails back and forth, emails with files back and forth with that, TCM, I put my initials -V2, or I put the date or something like that, and you're emailing these things back and forth, and then you're sitting there staring at them, trying to get them back into one solid, cohesive document. But what if we don't want our guests to have access to everything in that team? We run into this as a partner. We'll have a team for a project for a customer, and we'll have our internal stuff, all of our work in progress documents that we don't want the customer to see. It's not the appropriate time to give them those templates or those documents, or even to allow them to see that discussion. So this led to some silliness where we had an internal team and an external team, and that sucked. We came out with the idea of private channels. There we go. So you see the little itty bitty lock icon hiding there to let you know that that's a private channel. Just to help you see that and visualize things a bit better and keep track of everything, I've put the word private in the name of the channel. You wouldn't normally do that. That's not a team thing. That's just me to help you guys out when you're seeing things. So on the left is the team owner in their home tenant, And we can see we've got Racetrack's private channel there. And over here with the guest, we don't see that private channel, but we've still got our other two channels are there. So this is cool. I can now talk about other people. I mean, have my work in progress in the private channel, and my guest can't see that. All right, cool. How many people here like tenant switching? Right, there we go. I love tenant switching. I love going up, flipping the drop down, finding my phone, re-authenticating, going into another tenant to look at it. Oh, I gotta go back to my tenant because I need to find something in my Teams. No, it's terrible. So let's look under the hood at standard channels and how they work. So in Azure AD and Microsoft 365, we get a group. And we get a group for every team. So this isn't too bad. We've got some automatically generated things like all company. There's our internal and external example that I showed. So we've just doubled the number of groups that are sitting there clogging up Azure AD and M365. And way down here at the bottom, we've got our final 5 team. So we've got a little team icon there to denote that this group has a team associated with it. An M365 group doesn't have to have the Teams bolt-on or doesn't have to be activated for Teams, but Teams always needs that M365 group under the hood. When you see the word private in this context or public over here in this column, that's not about a channel type, that's about the group type. So more of this fun stuff of Microsoft overloading terms and using them everywhere for slightly different things. What that means is, can someone come and join one of these groups without needing someone to authenticate them, authorize them, and let them into that group? So can I just wander over? Yeah, I want to join that, click, and I'm in. That's cool for some things, not so cool for other things. So if we double click on the group, we wind up, we see a channels tab. So we get some visibility here into what's going on in Teams with the channels underneath. We can see the channel type that's going on. And we also get some other cool stuff here, like the membership tab. So if we dive into SharePoint, where all of our stuff is kept, all of our documents, we see a couple of things that are, I guess, sort of interesting if you're nice and nerdy and into this stuff. We see channel sites listed here, and those are the sites for the other channel types that are underneath this team. But what we're going to click on is this URL here. So we're actually going to go into the SharePoint link as if we were a user going into it, whereas that other 2 sites would be an administrative link. So if you know SharePoint, this looks pretty standard SharePoint. There's nothing unique in SharePoint for Teams. We've got our conversations up there in the top left. That's within Outlook for that group. We've got our documents on the left, our notebook on the left, and in the bottom right, we've got our doc libraries that will show up underneath that team. Now, we've also got members up here. All throughout SharePoint, you'll see members, owners, admins, guests, all these lists of users with all of these different types. If you are very daring and have lots of time to fix things, you could go ahead and you could start using those to administer your access into Teams. I highly discourage that if you go through SharePoint to change those memberships. There are things that are missed in Teams that Teams does around those owners. So there will be things that are a bit out of whack if you go under the hood and start editing things. So this is a full SharePoint site. If you want to do things for this group of people, so this M365 group of people that's got a team, do we want to do our classic SharePoint things with this group as well? You can absolutely go ahead and do that. You can set up your news, Your activity links will be here. All of those things that you can do in SharePoint, you can do here. You can leverage that same group, that same structure. So what happens when we throw guest accounts into that mix? So our guest account here, Artemis the cat, shows up with this really great long username with an ext in it, so I like the fact that they did that. And then the tenant name and the onmicrosoft.com extension to that tenant name of the tenant that we're adding them to, and then the tenant that Artemis came from is the Torren.ca. So if you ever dealt with Skype for Business or Link and external users in Federation there, where you had these really weird formats to be able to add external users, it's kind of the same deal here with guests. So the guest, Artemis in this case, has an account in my tenant. It's not we're trusting the torren.ca domain and allowing that user in. We are copying some of the identity of that user, and we're creating this user in our tenant, and they're unlicensed by default. You can assign licenses in your tenant to your guests if you want to, and they can do licensed things in your tenant. If we bounce back to SharePoint, we see them listed as well. It's a little nicer of a layout here. We don't see all the ext and the multiple domains and whatnot. We get a nicer tag that says guest to indicate that, hey, we've got a guest user in here. And their email address as well. This is some of the stuff I was talking about. We've got our owners, members, site admin, site owner, site members, site visitors. Tons of lists in there that will be automatically populated by the team's process. Don't change that stuff. So what do private channels look like under the hood? Not a heck of a lot different, but it's another layer. So on the left, we've got a group for our team, and it's hopefully spelled out here that this is a public team. And then if we click on our link, we see the private channels, and we see it called out that it's a channel, and then we get to see our membership of the private channel. So there's Racetrack as the creator of that channel is there, but we don't have the other users from the team there at this point. So what do they look like in SharePoint? We saw this top screen before, except this time we're going to click on this 2 sites. This is the link we clicked on last time to go look at the SharePoint structure. We're going to click on this 2 sites, and that brings us down here. And we see our URLs here that are equivalent to this one at the team level. These are for the private and the shared channels. Microsoft helpfully calls out here that a separate channel site is created for each private channel added to a team, and also shared channels. They haven't updated that quite yet. So if we click on that, we see the same stuff. We're just down into that channel now, that extra layer deep. Note, however, there are no guests here because this is a private channel, and guests don't come into your private channel. Guests come into the team and get everything but the private channel. So no Artemis, no cat. This is good. If we go into SharePoint, it looks just like the other SharePoint sites. So some fun facts about private channels. There's a limit right now of 30 per team. Your private channel members must be team members, so you have to first be added to the team before you can be added to the private channel. So you can't have an engineering team, for example, and then pull in someone from outside, from HR maybe, and add them in. They have to be added to the team and get fully exposed to everything that's in there. If you are really into URLs, the format is fairly nice, but it does take the names of your teams and your channels and whack them together with some dashes. It gets rid of spaces but will leave dashes. So if you have dashes in your names, it's really confusing as to what was your dash in between your words and your names, and what one was inserted by Microsoft between the team and the channel name. SharePoint will enforce private channel access. So just like in Teams where you can't get into a private channel if you, I'll just go through SharePoint. No, it's the same thing. Teams is just a different interface into that. So that security is respected and enforced. There is no easy or nice way to admin the private channel sites within SharePoint. So even just generating a list, I want to know what are all my private channels and sites that are out there. There's no really great, easy way to do that. From a Teams perspective, okay, do we really need to do that? You might want to do that just to audit things, to have a look what's out there, how many of these do we have. And then finally, tenant switching. We talked about that. We have one person who likes tenant switching. All right, so shared channels. Enough background nonsense. So shared channels in Active Directory and M365, well, there's nothing in there. It's not an AD or Microsoft 365 based group or structure. If we look in the external org, so the people who are coming in to that shared channel, there's also nothing. Someone invites me into their shared channel, there's nothing that goes into my tenant. That would be a really bad thing if you could invite me into your shared channel and you were now writing things into my tenant. So in SharePoint, within the home org, that's sharing things out. Down at the bottom, we've got our link to our site and our link to our SharePoint for that. So if we have a look now at our membership tab. So I did something interesting here. I set Artemis, who is our guest in that team, up as well with access to a shared channel. So can someone be a guest and have access via shared channels as well? Yes, but no, and we'll get there. So we see we've got our external users at the top, and the second one from the bottom, we've got Artemis and Carl from outside of our organization. We've got this group that was automatically created here for the members that are in the team. So this is going to take all of the users who are added to that team and represent them with that group. And then we've got our channel owner down at the bottom as her own ID, because she's going to have different permissions than that group. That's all the general user membership. Again, lots of member pokey things here that you can poke. Don't poke, just look. And like everything else, we can click on it, we can open up SharePoint. All of the SharePoint stuff is there. We can do all of our traditional SharePoint things there if we wanted to with that site. In the external org in SharePoint, there's nothing. It has no idea that anyone has been invited from that org into another org's shared channel. So how about security now in there? We have some policies in Teams for private and shared channels for if we want our users to be able to create those. So we've got to create private channels, create shared channels, invite external users to shared channels, and join external shared channels. So in terms of shared channels here, I can create them, I can invite people into that shared channel, and I can be allowed to be invited into other shared channels. So pretty broad in terms of the policies that are there. If you wanted to control your users from being able to join someone else's shared channels, that bottom slider, slide it on over and they won't be able to do that. If you want just 5 people to be able to do that, build a new policy, apply it to those 5 people. Those 5 people can go ahead and join outside channels, and everyone else cannot. Creating shared channels is a bit of an interesting one. I've got a slide that dives into that a little bit more, I think coming up next. That'll help us out with that.
Just a quick question on that.
Yeah.
What's the risk of your users joining external shared channels? It's their data, their tenant, like they're at risk for adding their files.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, when I think of this, I harken back to the link in the Skype for Business days when there was federation, so the ability to IM between organizations, and some organizations would restrict that. No federation. We can't allow our Coca-Cola users to talk to Pepsi users or anybody else. Or they'd set it up specifically to allow, yeah, we can talk to Microsoft, we can talk to Cloud Revolution, but nobody else. Okay, cool. But is that rational? Are you restricting their ability to call those other organizations on the phone? Well, if you're not, why are you restricting their ability to IM those other organizations? What's the difference here? Or email, or fax, or go for lunch with them. So you're trying to create a technical solution to an administrative problem or to a security problem. So the classic example is stock researchers and the traders. They're not supposed to talk to each other. So you can set all of these ethical walls, they call them, up in Link or Skype for Business and now in Teams. They can go for lunch together. They can golf together, and I'm sure they do. So who are we really fooling by doing this? So if the answer to that is the government, because we're regulated and we have to be able to give them reports, cool, implement that. But understand that you're really not stopping these people from talking to each other and sharing this information if they really want to. In my mind, I almost think that it would be better to allow that full flow and then use things like DLP to see, all right, what's going back and forth here? Is it innocent chatter and banter, or hey, is that our secret recipe that just went across? You know, we'll stop that and we'll send security in an empty box to go collect things from his desk. All right, so back to these settings. We're going to dive into those here on the next slide. So to create the private channels, the part that I want to call out here, I've done the bold italic underline. Team owners can control if members can create private channels. So as a member of a team, am I allowed to create a private channel within that team? And the team owner gets to set that, not IT. For shared channels, only team owners can create shared channels. So back here on this slide, where we've got the create shared channels slider, that only applies to team owners. If you're not a team owner, you cannot create a shared channel, whether or not this is enabled. So that's an important distinction to note between private and shared, that the two behaviors are a bit different there. And I don't know whether that's, hey, we had to ship shared channels 1.0, we'll circle back and we'll catch that later, or whether there was some security thinking that, yeah, there's some external exposure here. This is more akin to inviting guests than creating channels. So maybe we want this behavior to be different and locked down. And then inviting external users to share channels. Has anyone done shared channels and you've set it up? You've gone ahead, you've invited people, you've been invited. Okay, cool. So the Azure AD setup. This is the fun part, because we've got some sliders in Teams and they're on by default, so we can just go ahead and do this, right? No. So in Azure AD, there are two spots. There's B2B collaboration, which is not what we're after here. The collaboration is kind of the guest experience, your two tenants talking to each other. The B2B direct connect is your tenant trusting a user from another tenant to come in and do things within your tenant. So shared channels in essence, which is the only thing that uses that function right now. So if we hop into, I'm actually going to do this live here, see if my internet connection is working, because that will be a little bit easier for everyone to see. All right, so we're going to hop here into portal.azure.com. We want the external identities. And then you might be tempted to go to the external collaboration settings because Teams and channels are collaboration, right? No, they are in Teams, but not here. What we want is cross-tenant access settings. So we get 3 different tabs at the top. We've got organizational settings. We'll come back to those. We've got cloud settings. This is GCC, the 21 VNet China tenants. And we've got default settings. Play around here in default settings. We can see we've got B2B collaboration for users and applications. And then we've got direct connect for users and applications. So these are allowed already. This is the tenant that I've already set up. But if we click on those and we look at inbound, and we make sure we're looking at direct connect and not collaboration, this 2 or 3 times, I think it took me to learn this when I was first setting this up in my lab tenants last year. So by default, everything is set to block. So you could turn it on here and allow it. This lets anyone from any tenant come in if they're invited. And there's another tab here that's interesting called trust settings. And they are grayed out because I don't have an AD premium license assigned to this tenant. So we've got some things in here. We can trust the multi-factor authentication from another tenant. We can trust device compliance from other tenants. And we can trust hybrid joined devices from other tenants. So this is kind of cool. This is getting us, we're inviting these people into our tenant. It's letting us set our rules for our house. You know, my house, my rules. You'll do things this way or you won't come in. So it gives us some ability to enforce those things. So that's inbound. If we scroll down, we'll look at outbound. And it's much the same for users and groups, allow access. And then a little lower, we've got allow all users, or we can break it down into specific users and groups. So we've got another layer here of security, and this seems really redundant at this point. We've got those Teams policies that I showed you, so why do I also need to go generate a ticket in Jira and whatnot to get someone from the AD team to come in to set this up? The reason behind that is that B2B Direct Connect right now, Teams is the only thing that takes advantage of that. The ability to have 2 tenants, back to the on-prem AD days, it's like a trust relationship between them. The ability to have your 2 tenants work together to that level sure sounds appealing to a whole host of other functions. So I would expect sometime in the future to be more than Teams taking advantage of this. So that's our default settings. This is my lab. I've got everything wide open. A really good setting to turn on, and then use your team settings if there's anyone that you want to prevent for any of that. Come here to additional settings, and right now we are inheriting from the default, but I can type in, if I spell it right, type in Cloud Revolution. And it's not going to behave for me because, of course, why would it? Oh, sorry, I need to click the add, and then it's going to bring up a separate button. So it finds Cloud Revolution, it finds the tenant ID. I can click add. I now have a separate set of policies that I can apply to Cloud Revolution. I can leave the default settings there, or I can customize them and say, no one from Cloud Revolution is allowed inbound into my tenant, but I can leave the outbound open so my users can go and join their shared channels. So lots of granularity and flexibility. Everything is off by default in Azure AD, but on by default in Teams, which is very confusing. And if you are just trying to set up a shared channel with another organization, your two engineering groups, you'll probably run into, hey, they're not set up or you're not set up, but you go and have the Teams guys look at the team settings. It looks like everything should work. Microsoft has heard that, yeah, this is kind of a rough experience. Can you make this easier for us somehow? You know, use some of that workflow stuff. That would be cool. So they have heard that loud and clear, and will probably, I would assume, be doing something with that. So let me skip through the slides now that are just kind of a static representation of what we just did. So shared channel security. So DLP, labels, inspection, reporting, all of that stuff is still there if you are the home org. So you're the organization that owns the channel that is being shared out. You get to do all of that. If you are the organization that the user that's coming into that shared channel belongs to, you get to do none of that. Just like if someone mails a document or faxes a document or emails a document, you don't get any of that. Just like the phone call, the golf event, you don't have any control over that. So if you need that type of control for some sort of regulatory reasons, this might not be the solution for you, or you might need an agreement with this other organization who may well be regulated the same way, that you will be able to go over to them and have them pull these reports, and they'll do the reporting for you and the structuring behind that and the retention of everything that's in there. This is no different than the guest access story. If I'm joining your tenant as a guest, there's nothing in my organization to track that. The guest account is a different account. That's an account in your tenant that I'm using with my authentication. Reporting is available in something called access reviews. Everyone familiar with access reviews? Nobody is familiar with access reviews. Okay. So access reviews track essentially group membership and access to things. What permissions do you have as a user or as an administrator? So you can run reports on a scheduled basis one time, and you can do a couple of different things with them. You can have them go to an administrator for the admin to review and go, no, Torren doesn't need access to that. Why is he in there? And take him out. They can also go to the user and they can say, hey, Torren, you haven't used global admin for 3 months. Do you still need it? And you can click no, and poof, you're gone from global admin. So that type of reporting will be coming in there as well, which is helpful for what are your users doing, what are your teams doing, who's coming into your organization and doing things, because they're not your users, they're someone else's users. How to track those and report on those. Sensitivity labels is a good one. I'm pleased to see that I spelled sensitivity right here, or spell check corrected it properly for me. I struggled with that this week. So if you have labels on the channel, so container labels, those will stay there for the shared channel experience. Someone comes into that channel knows about those container labels, you're good. If you have documents in that channel and you have labels applied to that document, and your external user comes in, that external user doesn't know anything about those labels. They're just going to see a unique identifier string that they can't look up, because that belongs to your tenant, not to their tenant. So we talked about this as we went through it. There's the Azure AD settings and there's the team settings. They're the same, but they're set differently by default, and it's confusing. Got to be enabled in both spots to work. And yes, it seems silly now. More things will probably come down the road that use that makes it make a little more sense. All right, these are the reports that I was talking about. We can go in, oh, sorry, this is not the reports, this is conditional access. I mentioned earlier the setting under trust. We can trust the settings coming from the other tenant around their users. What if that other tenant doesn't have multi-factor authentication, or they did the minimum? They're allowing SMS, and we're a defense contractor, and SMS multi-factor authentication is terrible because someone's going to try and clone our phones. So I can come in here and create a conditional access policy, and B2B Direct Connect users is in there as someone that I can apply a policy to. So those are the users from the other tenant rather than my own users. So I can make them their own policy when they come in. And for the type of the policy, I can come in here and I can set the strength. I can say, yeah, you've got to use your phish-resistant keys, for example, no SMS. Or you've got to use the code that you got to type in. It gives you the context, gives you the pretty map. Are those maps right for everybody? Because I live in a little town in British Columbia, and it's really cool to see where everybody thinks I am. Sometimes they've got it right. Sometimes I'm, a 1.5 hour flight to the west. Those databases, by the way, are on the honor system. I have an IP address that I have access to in my hometown that comes up as if I was in Chicago. Half of the internet, when I'm on that IP address, thinks I'm in Chicago. The other half uses a different database and goes, no, you're in Kamloops. So that's cool that we can change our conditional access for that group, or at least enforce the same standard that we have. Maybe enforce a stronger standard for them. When you are Carl at mynewlabdomain.com being added in as a shared user, the home tenant, in this case bumpinthenet.onmicrosoft.com, needs permission from Carl to do some stuff. My tenant that's sharing things out needs to talk to Carl's tenant to be able to do all of this. If Carl cancels this, Carl doesn't get access. He has to click accept, and there's a little link that, hey, this isn't a Microsoft thing, this is the other tenant that's doing this. If, when Carl comes in, he's never set up multi-factor authentication, he, at that point, is going to be prompted. It's going to come up with, hey, we need some more information to keep your account secure. It's the same process. It's just going to be triggered by the tenant that he's coming into. But where he's doing that setup is in his own tenant. So we're getting a little bit of, we're making things happen in someone else's tenant, but we're making good things happen in someone else's tenant. As the user, we also get our activity feed up top. Hey, someone shared a channel with you. When you are in the channel having a chat, we're now starting to see some flags and some reminders pop up in Teams. This channel is shared with members in other orgs, and you can click on the other orgs and it'll give you an explanation about what's going on. So this is just a good reminder. If someone automatically gets added into your own internal team, it's great to let them know that there are external people in here, so this is maybe a great place to not put the confidential company documents and discussions. All right, so shared channels are not quite brand new, but I would say they're still a 1.0. We haven't seen kind of a refresh or the addition of everything. So what doesn't work? What's on the to-do list? So I mentioned earlier that there are no guests in shared channels. This would be really weird if this could happen. I would be in that channel as two different accounts that belong to me. I would be in there with that Artemis _ Torren ext at whatever, and then with my own account. So bad things would happen. The experience here up top, this is our team with all of our channels. We have here our external user who is invited into the shared channel. So this is artemis@torren.ca, and this is Artemis Torren.ca ext, our guest account. And we can see they get general and racetracks theories, but not the shared account. So it splits the access for Artemis into those two different views. Two separate accounts, two different views, even though those accounts belong to the same person, or in this case, the same cat. So other things that are missing, templates. You can't yet do a template to deploy your things into shared channels. If you work with folks who are in GCC and you're in commercial or vice versa, you're not going to be able to share channels back and forth with each other. Planner, calendar, both of those are based on that M365 group, which isn't what shared channels uses for users, for ownership. So they just don't work. Those things need to be re-architected to use the groups that are visible that we see in those members slices in SharePoint to be able to work properly. Channel conversation links, you can't do the deep link into the conversation. Moderation, if you want to moderate your channels, they can't be shared channels at this point. Tags within the channels don't yet work, and all that fun programmable stuff for bots, all of your connectors into that shared channel, they don't work. And that's maybe a bad thing, but that's also maybe a good thing when you're sharing your documents back and forth, your conversations back and forth. What's going on with all this automatic stuff? Is someone just going to siphon all of these documents out and do something that we can't quite track yet? So some odd experience. Anybody like the new Teams client? Anyone using that? Has everyone tried it? It's zippy, it's fast, it's great, but there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't work yet or works differently. You open a OneNote in the old version versus the new version, and one opens in a browser, the other opens. Good times. So this is coming. Everything with that new client is still in the pre-release. They're working on getting all of those things. Questions?